Hello there, my name is Jonathan McIntosh, and in this video I would like to talk to you about some facts to do with Indonesia, and following that I'd like to talk about layers of cultural influence or different strata that have played a very important part in shaping Indonesia and also the performing arts, particularly the performing arts associated with gamelan music performance. So Indonesia is a vast country that stretches all the way from the very large island of Sumatra in the west to the province of West Papua in the east. And there are hundreds, thousands of islands in between those two provinces. Indonesia is a composite word made up of two Greek words, indos and nesos. And Indonesia during colonial times was ruled by the Dutch and was known as the Dutch East Indies. Indonesia declared independence in 1945, although this wasn't recognized officially by the government in the Netherlands until 1949. The national motto of Indonesia is Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, and it's a phrase which translates into English as unity in diversity. And it's a very apt nationalist motto that tries to coalesce the various ethnic groups that make up this really very diverse country. So here are some important facts about Indonesia. Some of them you might know, some of them you might not. But Indonesia really is the largest, definitely, but it's probably one of the most complicated nations in Southeast Asia. It is a vast archipelago of over 17,500 islands. Some of the literature talks about that being closer to 18,500 islands, depending on tides, for example. And it's generally agreed that there's round about 6,000 islands inhabited, but these might not be inhabited permanently. Indonesia is the fourth most populous nation in the world, with just under 240 million people. It's also parts of Indonesia are also the most densely populated areas in the world. Indonesia is the largest Muslim nation in the world. According to figures from 2010, 87% of the population declares itself to be Muslim. However, the country has 6 official languages, and alongside Islam we have Christianity, Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, as well as Hinduism, Buddhism and Confucianism. And in Indonesia everyone has to have an identity card, and even if you don't profess to follow one of these 6 religions, you have to tick one of these 6 religions on your identity card. Indonesia is such a melting pot because there are over 300 ethnic groups that live on these islands, and these groups are very, very diverse in terms of customs, languages and traditions, also in the music that they sing and perform. So it makes Indonesia a very, very interesting place. And in terms of ethnomusicology, Indonesia has been a very important place for various studies, and was one of the first places where ethnomusicologists went to conduct research in the first half of the 20th century. And we have scholars such as the Dutch ethnomusicologist Jaap Kunst conducting research here in the 20s and 30s, and Jaap Kunst even he devised the word ethnomusicology, so he's a very important figure. And then also the American scholar Mantle Hood, who conducted research in Java and Bali, like Kunst. And Mantle Hood was actually taught by Jaap Kunst in Amsterdam. So Indonesia plays a very important role in ethnomusicology, and it also plays a very important role in the School of Music at Monash University, because Margaret Kartomi is one of the leading scholars in the world who looks and researches at music and dance in Indonesia, and she's worked at Monash University for a very long time and is very well respected. So, in the lecture that will relate to this video, in the lecture we'll be talking about gamelan music from two islands in particular in Indonesia, from the island of Java and from the much smaller island of Bali, that's to the east of Java. Java is probably the most densely populated island in the world. And usually the island is divided into three parts. And these parts, the division of the island in this way is to do with cultural and linguistic grounds. And when we talk about gamelan music in the lecture, we'll be talking about music that comes from the provinces of Central and East Java. This is because in West Java, it's primarily inhabited by a group who call themselves the Sundanese, and West Java is also known as Sunda. So Sundanese is a very different language, it's a different ethnicity, it's a different kind of culture. They do have gamelan music, but it is quite different to the gamelan music from Central and Eastern Java. In the province of Central and East Java, they speak a language called Javanese, although East Javanese tends to be a derivative of this language. And there's a much closer connection between Central Javanese and East Javanese music and dance, for example. There is also a province that's not necessarily shown on this map, but this is the special government region of Yogyakarta, and this is the region that includes the city of Yogyakarta, which is situated on the southern coast in the middle of the island there. This is a special province because during the claim for independence, following at the end of World War II, Yogyakarta sided with the nationalists in the fight for independence from the Dutch. So following independence, Yogyakarta was claimed to be a special province within the island of Java. You'll see there's also another city that's marked out in the center of Central Java, and this is the city of Surakarta, which is also known as Solo. And in Central Java, Yogyakarta and Surakarta are the main cities for Central Javanese gamelan music. And they're very important because they're also centers of royal courts, or kratons, which are large palaces where the king would have lived in his palace, and he would have employed many musicians and dancers and artists to create works for him. So Yogyakarta and Surakarta had their own kind of gamelan traditions, dance traditions, etc. And that's kind of still is very important for the scholarship of Central Javanese gamelan music today. That's not to say that other areas in Central Java don't have their own traditions, because they do, but for the purpose of the lecture, the names Yogyakarta and Surakarta will suffice. The much smaller island of Bali to the east of Java also plays an important role in ethnomusicology. There's been a lot of research done here by various scholars, including myself, and one of the main scholars to conduct initial research was a Canadian musicologist who was also a concert pianist called Colin McPhee, and he worked on a huge book called Music in Bali that was published in 1966 after his death in 1964. And this book contains a huge number of transcriptions as well as hundreds of photographic stills taken of musical life in Bali during the 1930s, and it's a very important record for ethnomusicological research. So in the lecture, we'll be talking about gamelan music from Central Java and gamelan music from the much smaller island of Bali. When we talk about the performing arts in Indonesia, in ethnomusicology, it's very important to understand that the complexities that we talk about in relation to Indonesia stem from various influences that have come to this part of the world. And we talk about layers of cultural influence, or strata, so different levels that kind of sit one on top of the other. And four of the main layers of cultural influence, or four of these strata, are described by Margaret Cartoni in a chapter from the book Musics of Many Cultures. And Margaret Cartoni talks about four influences, and these are animism, influences that came from India in terms of religion, philosophy and art, Islam, and then finally European religions and cultures. And I'm now going to talk about each of these briefly in turn. So animism is really about the worship of spirits or ancestors. And in animism, various things can have spirits. So you could have a rock that has a spirit, or a flower that has a spirit. Mountains have spirits. Streams and waterfalls have their own spirits. So it's about engaging with the natural world. And in animist kind of religions or belief systems, there's, particularly in Southeast Asia, there's this dichotomy or opposition between the mountain and the sea that is very, very important. In Bali, for example, where I conduct research, and a similar understanding is prevalent in Java, the Balinese believe that the mountain connects the land where the ordinary human beings live with the heavens, and it's via the mountain that gods descend from heaven to the earth. In contrast, the sea in Bali is seen as a very dangerous place, because the sea is where malevolent spirits are supposed to reside, or they reside very close to the sea. So this dichotomy between benevolence and malevolence is something that we see quite a lot in Southeast Asian animist belief systems. And most importantly, animism is still prevalent within many religions in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia. So although, for example, in Central Java, many people may proclaim to be Muslims, they'll still believe in certain animistic practices that inform their sense of Islam in this part of the world. Similarly, in Bali, where a majority of the Balinese are Balinese Hindu, which is a kind of syncretic mix of Hinduism and Buddhism mixed with animism, the Balinese still make rice offerings every day and place them on the ground. And these offerings of rice are supposed to please the spirits in the ground. So animism is still very important, and it's mixed in with other major religions. Indian influences are also extremely important in Indonesia and throughout mainland Southeast Asia. And the religions of Hinduism and Buddhism were widespread throughout mainland Southeast Asia well before 1000 years AD. And today we see these influences particularly in the stories or the Indian epics that were brought from India to Southeast Asia. So in particular, we have the stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and these tell various episodes of kings and queens, princes and princesses, kind of evil characters or evil demons that whisk princesses away, and then there are great big battles in order to go and rescue princesses, for example. And we have evidence of the influence of Hinduism and Buddhism right across Southeast Asia. And these stem from historical sites such as temples, and I've included two of perhaps the most famous empires or temples associated with empires in Southeast Asia. And these include Angkor Wat, which is a very large temple complex in Cambodia, and also the Majapahit Empire, which was present in Southeast Asia in East Java. And the Majapahit Empire still influenced gamelan and dance practices in Java and Bali today. Indeed, in Java we have one of the world's largest Buddhist temples, known as Borobudur, and you can see pictures of it here on the screen, and also large Buddha-like figures. At such temples we also have wall reliefs that kind of, in some of these wall reliefs, they show us musicians and dancers from these times. But we can still see the influence of Indian Indian essence at this time through various performing arts, including shadow puppet performance, where episodes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata are still performed today. We also have other forms of theatre, such as Wayang, which is a doll puppet theatre, and also dance dramas, which involve human beings portraying these characters. The Balinese Ramayana dance drama, again, is another very good and well-known influence from Bali, where dancers and musicians portray specific stories from the Ramayana in performance. Islam was brought to Indonesia probably around about the 12th century, and it was brought primarily to Sumatra first, which is the large island on the left-hand side of the screen, and then gradually filtered through a large percentage of the country. And you can see that there are modernist and then traditionalist Islam practices here on the screen. And in Java, there tends to have always been a very syncretic form of Islam that's practiced, with essences of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Animism still in the mix. And it's only within very recent times that Islam in Java has kind of taken on maybe a bit more of a harder edge, influenced by practices emanating from the Middle East. Finally, in terms of Khartoum's four strata, there's Christianity. And Christianity was brought to Indonesia in the 16th century by Portuguese sailors who came to Indonesia in search of the Spice Islands in and around the Ambon region of Indonesia. So if you have read the book Nathaniel's Nutmeg, which is a popular science publication, it talks about the European powers coming to this part of the world in order to find spices such as nutmeg, pepper and cloves, and take them back to Europe, where they could sell these spices for an inordinate amount of money at this time. So Portuguese sailors were the first to bring Christianity to Indonesia, and you can see on the screen that areas that were influenced by Christianity include the Batak region in Sumatra, parts of Dayak tribes in Kalimantan, and then other areas such as the Toraja in Sulawesi and the Timorese in East Timor, where in East Timor they still speak Portuguese, as a matter of fact. Christianity influenced church and folk music practices, particularly hymn singing. And we also have a popular style of music called keroncong. And this style kind of was very prevalent in the first part of the 20th century. So the 1920s, 1930s in Java, the keroncong was very popular, and it utilized various instruments that were brought to Indonesia by the Portuguese, in particularly instruments such as the guitar and the ukulele, for example. And finally, having talked about Indonesia more generally, and then talking about the various layers of cultural influence, what does the word traditional mean when we talk about the traditional performing arts in relation to gamelan and dance music practices from this part of the world? Well, in Central Java and in Bali, tradition usually denotes a continuity with the past. So the notion that past musical practices are important and inform the practice of music and dance in the present. So in having this link between the present and the past, there's this sense of continuity. However, this doesn't mean that practices stay the same, because there's a process of creative change, but it just means that change is influenced by a notion of continuity with the past. And the traditional performing arts are usually passed on from one generation to the next via oral transmission. So although notation does exist and has been developed primarily since independence as a result of the nationalization of the performing arts in various government academies, it's still passed on by teachers singing or demonstrating to students how to perform these various forms. Traditional in this context doesn't mean authentic. Authentic is a very problematic term in ethnomusicology, and it doesn't mean indigenous either, because of the layers of cultural influences that have been brought to Indonesia. But traditional performing arts are usually classified in opposition to popular or mass-mediated forms, or contemporary or avant-garde styles of theatre. In Java and Bali, when we talk about gamelan music and dance, we're really referring to Hindu-Buddhist influenced court practices. So these are court practices dating from roughly the kind of 13th to 16th century in Java. And then with Islam in Java, these practices kind of continued but became Islamicized. When Islam finally defeated the last Hindu Javanese kingdom in around about the year 1500, people from the Majapahit Empire, which was the last remaining Hindu Javanese kingdom, they fled to Bali, where a similar court system was already established. And in Bali, the kind of Hindu-Buddhist arts really flourished until the arrival of the Dutch in the mid-19th century. And with the arrival of the Dutch, the Balinese kings and their court systems gradually started to decline until the Dutch took full control of the island in 1908. However, following 1908 was a great time of change in the Balinese performing arts, and we'll be talking about why this is important in the lecture. So today, traditional performing arts, they continue to play an important role in religious practices or practices associated with court settings, probably more so in Bali in terms of religion, where music and dance are integral to the Bali Hindu belief. And since 1945, traditional practices have been nationalized in terms of the setting up of government performing arts academies. And This has also played a very important part in creative processes that have influenced new directions and change associated with gamelan and related dance performances in Java and Bali.